Hey, what's up everyone? This is Nick and today we're doing another action figure review. This is the Battle Action Godzilla by ToyBiz, not Trendmasters, from the 1998 Godzilla film. So I found this up in my parents' attic. It was actually really nicely preserved, and just like the Living Godzilla that I reviewed, the electronics are intact. The action features move just as fluidly as they used to, and the sounds are just as loud and crystal clear as they were back in '98. So that's really cool. Now, like I said, this is by ToyBiz and not Trendmasters. So Trendmasters did the main line of toys, and then ToyBiz did like the remote control toys and I guess kind of any role-playing type products. And generally, I thought that their sculpts were a little bit more realistic looking. They did a really good remote control rubbery Godzilla, and it has a sculpt very similar to this and kind of a greenish coloring like this one. And that one has a little remote control that's a tank, and it's connected by a wire. And then they did a couple different baby Godzillas, one of which has a really nice bluish coloring, bluish gray coloring that combined with a really nice sculpt that it has, I think make it looking incredibly like the film. And that one has a remote control as well. And the remote control, they kind of design it sort of like this, where they make it look scaly and spiky. So what this one is here, this is the Battle Action Godzilla. And surprisingly, out of most of the 1998 merchandise, this is actually one of the Godzillas you're going to be able to find cheapest. I looked these up on eBay. I think loose like this, they go for maybe between $20 and $30 shipped. And then a box one is like $60, which is a really good price considering how expensive some of these Trendmasters figures go. I think one of the reasons for that is this is a very bizarre piece. It's a very nice sculpt, but I remember even as a kid thinking how weird this was. So you have a very nicely realistic looking Godzilla, and then you have a handle on his back with buttons on it to make him, interact. And then he has a very nice display stand. It has very nice detailing on it. You got crushed tank, sidewalk, street, manhole covers, taxi cabs. Really nice looking. But you can't take his foot off of it. So this was kind of, it didn't really work as a display piece because you had this handle, but it didn't really work as a play feature or anything to play with, because you couldn't take him off the base. And yeah, I mean, it was one of those things I liked to play around with. And I remember thinking that I wasn't into it at the time, but like if someone was making like little stop motion movies or something like that, this would be good to use if you want like a close-up of the foot and you want to get some good action of the foot moving, or the hands or the face moving, because it's very detailed, so it works for close-ups of certain features, but obviously not a long shot. I think what they could have done to improve this is, instead of taking away his spikes and putting the handle, maybe just shape his spikes in a way so that they form the handle and they still have that bluish spiky look. Or make it so you can swap this out and attach it in there. Or don't do the handle, just have the spikes, and then you push down on the spikes, and each spike is like a button. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons here. Just have 4 spikes that could be pushed down and act as buttons, like one that articulates the mouth, etc. I'm wondering if there's maybe some weird clause in the agreement, like the licensing agreement, that ToyBiz could do a licensed Toho character, like Godzilla, as long as it wasn't an actual action figure. And I'm wondering if that's why they did this, to make it seem more like a role-playing or remote control type vehicle. Toy. That's probably what it was, because Trendmasters had the license to do the figures, and ToyBiz typically just does remote control figures. They did the remote control Godzilla and Baby Godzilla I was talking about. So I'm wondering if they want to make something that was more like an action figure, and they just had to add this on so that technically they're not making an action figure, they're making a remote control toy. So I'm thinking that's probably why they did this, was so that they can kind of get away with it. That being said, it's a really nice Godzilla sculpt. Look at all the detailing in there. This is probably, we've looked at a lot of really nicely detailed Godzilla faces, and I keep saying, oh, I think this one's the best, this one's the best. This one, hands down, is the most realistic looking, and they did a very nice job painting his eye. They got his pupil, they got the white of the pupil. It's also not just orange around it, it's got varied colors of orange, perfectly proportioned, really nicely detailed. They did a great job with the teeth and that kind of crocodilian texture, where you can see all the bumps and ridges where the teeth come out of. Now, he is a very dark green color, which is odd. Now, often Godzilla is depicted as green or gray, but in the movie, he was very definitely the gray color that you see depicted by the Trendmasters figures. So again, this could just be something they did. Maybe it's a contractual thing. Maybe it's just them taking their own liberty. I don't know. I really don't know. But he does have the bluish coloring on the spikes. I don't think the blue on the spikes is as nicely painted as it is on the Trendmasters figures. It looks almost like a kind of a cheap metallic color because you have the lighter coloring here, which would have been fine, but then they kind of tried to accent it by putting like a drop, a really sloppy drop of a darker metallic blue at the very tips, and it just doesn't look really good. So this tail is articulated into segments, which actually doesn't bother me because the gaps in between the segments are very, very small, and they're not very noticeable. There are some screw holes on the back. I'm okay with screw holes on the back of Godzilla figures because they're typically concealed by things. You have the speaker on the stomach, nicely painted metallic blue on the stomach, and it kind of fades into the green very nicely. But I mean, I said he should have been gray instead of green. That being said, though, it is a very nice, very realistic looking green color. I mean, look at that. There's definitely a lot of different variants. There's darker parts, lighter parts, etc. For some reason, and they did this with all of their electronic Godzilla figures, there's like this splatter orangish red coloring on the hands around the claws, and it's really noticeable on the toe claws. It's actually very badly painted on them. So it's weird. I have no idea what it's supposed to be. I guess I figured it was like supposed to be blood or something because I couldn't think of why there would be an orangish red color on his claws, but they're more orange than red, so it's bizarre. Yeah, and then there's kind of more of an orangish color on the underside of his tail instead of that bluish color. So the paint job, I'd say, overall is very well applied and looks cool if that's the coloring he was in the film. It's not so off that, you know, it looks bad or anything. It's just weird. And then they have kind of a whitish color here, moving from the metallic color, and it doesn't blend very nicely there. You can kind of see the brush strokes there. So it's kind of weird. I wish we took the color palette of the Trendmasters figures and put it on this sculpt and then took this gimmicky stuff off. I kind of wish that ToyBiz just had the license to just do the action figures, because then you would have had a sculpt and detailing like this, but again, more like an action figure without the harness or whatever and the regular paint job, hopefully. But really, really nice. Maybe it would have worked out better that way, because everyone always says that Trendmasters went bankrupt or something like that shortly after this movie because they put out too much product and they just invested too much into it. So I don't know, maybe that would have happened to ToyBiz if they did it. But so how this works is you have two scales at the top of the handle, and then you have two buttons at the bottom. So I don't remember which one does which. We'll start with the scale looking buttons. So what he's doing is he's swinging down one arm, and he should be opening his mouth. He obviously heard the roar. All right, very cool. The other button, he's swinging this arm down. That was my only issue with it as a kid, as far as the action features go, was that the tail barely moves and it makes this big whooshing sound. You know, it's just kind of like he's like lifting it 2 inches off the ground, but it's still very impressive. I think the action features, there's a lot of fluid movement to it, a lot of good sounds. I think this is something worth picking up in your collection, and even makes a good display piece, because even though it is kind of gimmicky and you know, it's got this like role-playing handle on it, it's still a very good face sculpt. Overall, good paint job, especially for a mass-produced 90s toy, even though not entirely accurate. But yeah, I think it's a good piece. It's a good way to have a nice, sizable, but also affordable piece of Godzilla 1998 merchandise on your shelf, just to have some kind of representation. So I would definitely recommend him, considering he's not going for a whole lot on eBay, loose or boxed, compared to some of the other offerings from the line. But if you could really only have one, I'd hold out for one of the Trendmasters figures. Having looked at some of these older figures that I got out of my attic and comparing them, I'd still say I think the best overall, in my opinion, is the Supreme. He's large enough to be imposing, not too big to have to try and display or handle like the Ultimate. He's got the nice paint job, the nice sculpt, no real gimmicks that interfere with his sculpt, and obviously the great paint job, and he's got a really nice pose to him as well. But yeah, I mean, I think any of the Trendmasters figures would be nice. There really weren't any bad looking figures in the line, and that's probably why so many of them are really hard to find. So if you haven't already, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys around.